African leaders are meeting today to discuss Niger after coup leaders who seized power there on July 26 defied a deadline to reinstate the ousted president or face the threat of military intervention, a spokesperson for the regional bloc says. The Economic Community of West African States, which has previously sent military forces into troubled member states and imposed sanctions, had told the coup leaders to stand down by Sunday, but the coup leaders instead closed Niger's airspace and pledged to defend its country. As Ecowas leaders converged in Abuja, the Nigeria's capital, for the extraordinary summit on Niger, DAYBREAK will be discussing the options to resolve the political impasse in the country and the unity and peace, and how to restore unity and peace in the Economic Community of West African States. Our guest this morning is Haruna Ali Warkani. Mr. Warkani is a retired diplomat with the Ecowas Commission and the deputy country chair of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He is a strategist, a security administration expert, and a cybersecurity practitioner. It's a pleasure to have you join us in the studio.
Good morning. Good morning.
You're retired, but you don't seem tired.
Well, retired but active.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, viewers.
Since this incident, the entire region has been thrown into restlessness, basically. What's still for us, we chair the ECOWAS committee, a new president who is struggling to settle and come to terms with some of the economic and social conditions of the country, now trusted with another big responsibility of resolving an impasse that has so much consequence for Nigeria, considering that we share the vastest part of our borderline with Niger. Today they meet in Abuja. There have been a series of sanctions and upscaling, and on our part we've closed borders and taken all kinds of actions. What are you expecting from this meeting today? Is it to double down on it, or to begin to explore the channels that have now been provided by the 14th Emir of Kano, Sanusi Mohammed?
Thank you. And viewers, it's a pleasure being here. Starting from the incident itself, you could see that West Africa has been going through similar crisis of military takeovers. And the fundamentals need to be understood clearly. Why will there be military takeovers of a supposedly democratic government? Without good governance, there can be no panacea or end to military takeovers. Because democracy in itself and democratic governments seems to be without a check. Once people get elected, and elected here is in quotes, because the fundamental beginning of some of these things is bad elections. Bad elections throws up people who ordinarily should not be leaders. But because of the democratic institutions that produces these leaders, you end up with people who have no trust of the people. And therefore, it's already a breeding ground for crisis. This is what has happened. Because if you go back to Niger, you will see how unpopular the ousted president had been ab initio. He, yes, had a history of politics, but that was not really much. And therefore the people whom he was presiding over did not have the trust of such a government.
Are you saying he didn't win the election?
You wouldn't say he didn't win, because that amounts to something else. But invariably it means the wins in quotes. People could win elections in quotes. It does not mean they represent the real wishes of the people. We've seen the failure of electoral commissions across West Africa, which had been the source of conflict thereafter. Either immediately after the elections, people voice their anger to say, we didn't elect this person. Meanwhile, the electoral empire had declared such a person, you wouldn't expect citizens to be comfortable with that kind of setting. And don't forget, the military are also part of the citizens. We must not also forget, particularly in West Africa, even Central Africa and the rest of them, that it is civilians that normally call for the military to intervene. Because civilians will find themselves powerless to change a government once in. You do not have any mechanism for whatsoever. Now, interestingly, democracy has what you call impeachment, which is supposed to be the safety latch in a democracy. If Mr. A is not performing, the institutions of government are expected to checkmate such a person and remove him from office. But there is no history to tell you that presidents, particularly at that level, can be removed through impeachment.
Pardon the interruption, Mr. Warkani, but since we're talking about this, for us observers looking in from the outside, this looks premeditated, because this administration of Mohamed Bazoum is not even up to 2 years, and he's not been in power for 2 years. So I mean, one would have thought that he had a lot of bad luck going in, because even before, just days before his inauguration, there was a planned coup that was foiled. And now you get the sense that after, I think on Monday, when the regime announced a prime minister in Lamine Zain, for instance, who had served under Tenja, that was also removed back in 2010. It gives you a sense that this was premeditated, that his administration was already targeted for this kind of a thing. It doesn't matter whether he performs or not, that this was bound to happen in the first place.
Well, it could be a conclusion, but it might not necessarily be also right, because the fact that there was a coup immediately he came into power will tell you, yes, there are some perhaps primordial sentiments existing before he came in. And that is tying to what I was trying to say. Within the milieu of the society, there are always some triggers that ought to have been, attention paid to. And in this case, I suppose it wasn't, because when elections are not transparent, we need to emphasize this. When elections are not transparent, the choice of leadership becomes a problem. And once you start with that, yes, the problems are likely to manifest bigger and bigger as time goes on. So Bazoum may not have had the opportunity to actually say who and what he was as a president, because rating him with programs and projects and governance ratings might be a bit difficult because of the short period of time. But that notwithstanding, like we said, the social setting in Niger was clear that he perhaps might not necessarily be the right person.
All right. So coming to that first question, what options are there before the meeting today? If you were to give us an inkling into the thinking of these leaders?
Well, options are really limited. We must be honest with that. Options are limited before the heads of state of Ecowas, because one would say, in line with tradition or traditional practice of how Ecowas normally was expected to respond to things like this, you could say all the cards before the Ecowas heads of states has been played within the week. Sanction, right? Diplomatic engagements, threats, etc., etc. What else would you manufacture as new vista to say, okay, we've not tried this, let us try this, or a repetition or reinforcement of the existing measures already taken? Now, we must be candid with ourselves. The rush into sanctions, suspension of member states, as we have seen, is partly a problem. for the ECOWAS heads of state, because once a coup occurs, going by the protocol on good governance that the member states have acceded to, member states are supposed to be suspended, which is what has happened. However, we have seen too that there is a flaw in the implementation or application of this protocol, in the sense that
on the part of ECOWAS?
Yes,
right.
Yes. When someone is a member and you went ahead to suspend that member state, essentially you have closed communication channels with such a member state, because if I were head of state or a coupist in that regard, if you suspend me, I will insist you must never talk to me again. So there is already a confusion, a breakdown of nexus between principle and practice. Because if someone is suspended, ordinarily you shouldn't talk to him. It happened.
If you don't suspend him, doesn't that amount to rewarding bad behavior? Because you can't just wake up and take over government and still want recognition as if you are somehow legally entitled to that recognition.
Exactly. It's like the egg and chicken scenario. It's like egg and chicken scenario. Let me bring back to our thought processes what happened in Guinea. After the coup in Guinea, ECOWAS sent a delegation which included the former president of ECOWAS Commission itself. And the new military authority said, we won't talk to you. Don't even come into our country. We are already suspended. You have closed the avenue for negotiations in a way. So you see, here you will perhaps have to introduce third-party envoys or negotiators into the system rather than remain within an ECOWAS setting, and that is where I was pulling to. Suspension should be done carefully. 2, sanctions. Sanctions by themselves have never really worked anywhere in the world, not just in West Africa. Sanctions have never worked. If we cast our mind back to the anti-apartheid movement or struggles, you would see where the Western world attempted to impose sanctions here and there. Africa was against it. Sanctions were busted, and government still continued. If you went around the world historically, you will also find that wherever sanctions were imposed, it only succeeded in bringing out the ingenuity of the sufferers of these sanctions, because they created new avenues to do the same thing differently. And therefore, here in West Africa, we are like running out of options. The heads of state definitely are confronted with situations where, yes, you could have sanctions in place, but implementing those sanctions and how effective they are is another question. Today, I expect the heads of states to first review the measures so far taken. Where are we? Has it achieved minimal or maximal impact? Is it likely to change the course of the history piling up in Niger? The answers to this will be simple. Neither the suspension nor the sanctions has produced the desired result, because the ousted president is not back and may likely never be back. The country had told the regional bloc, point blank, we will not restore the ousted president. And I think as of today, the man ought to have resigned.
I mean, I think the reporting is that he has already resigned and is actually been evacuated from the presidential palace. But there's been a lot of threat, not just from ECOWAS to the leadership of the military junta in Niger, but also from the junta to the rest of the world whether it's France, whether it's United States, whether it's Ecowas, they said, listen, you think you can attack us, we'll definitely fight you back. They've had some sort of endorsements as well as supports from other military leadership across the region, and also they've got some sort of support, we believe, from Russia and Algeria also that is willing to back them. So it appears that nobody's sheathing their sword at the moment, even though nothing tangible has happened yet. But the threat of a military intervention is real. Give me an idea as to how we can lower the temperature down, especially when they're not in talking terms. The ECOWAS delegation was not well received in Niger. The UN delegation was not also well received. There was a special diplomat, senior diplomat that was sent from the United States to talk to the leadership yesterday. We believe that he was also turned down. But we got the 14th Emir of Kano, who for some reason was able to see the leader himself, Mohammed, I believe, Abdurrahmani Chiani. We've seen the pictures all over the papers this morning. Give me an understanding how this could be the low-hanging fruit that ECOWAS could likely latch on if we're supposed to explore more diplomatic means to talk to them. And also, is talking going to get the job done? Because I feel like they both want different things. ECOWAS wants the restoration of Bazoum, and I don't think that that's what the military leadership in Niger want.
Well, like we said, certainly power, like has been said, is not served a la carte. It is taken. Now, the military have taken power. If anyone expects them to hand over power to anyone just on a platter of gold, that may be expecting too much, because they had good reasons in their mind to have gone to take over power. Taking over power itself is a risk, which includes execution if you are unable to succeed. We have seen in several places failed coups resulting into court-martial, from court-martial to executions. Therefore, for anybody to put his life on the line, take over power, and then install himself, and now becomes the sovereign, and you expect him to hand over such power to you back peacefully, that might be wishful thinking.
So you're saying that you don't see a peaceful resolution that could lead to the restoration of Mohamed Bazoum as president?
No.
But the question then would be, what does this signpost for the West African sub-region? This is the 5th coup in the region. I know you have laid some precedents to why some of these things happen. If we don't see this kind of resistance from the West African sub-region, is this not going to encourage
the only question would be, who is next?
Who is next?
Right.
Well, yes, who is next? Because it's not even who is next plus when. But not that it will disappear. As long as there is bad governance, we should expect change. And that change cannot come through civil means, because the only civil means is by impeachment. Impeachment does not work, because the way it is crafted in almost all the constitutions makes it practically impossible. And therefore, you leave citizens with no choices. You see, the West African bloc will need to go back to the drawing table and apply equal measure to observance of good governance, and read the indices of failure very early to avoid a military coup. This will be the panacea, so that you don't have to wait until there is a military takeover before you come forward in panic mode. You start pressing buttons all over the place. No. From preparations for elections to the elections themselves and inauguration of a new government, the regional bloc should be more interested in what really happens and ensure transparency in all these processes. This will remove the need for any military coup. But as long as we fail in those simple civil actions, we will only but encourage more incursions into the democratic space. And so now, these measures that have already been taken, like we've said, might not produce the desired result, because the restoration of Bazoum as president of Niger might look very, very tall. Very tall. And I told you earlier, these people have a feeling, the military authorities in Niger today having a feeling that they have been ostracized. You've already declared what you intend to do. And if you are threatening me and still knocking with another hand that you want to come in, yes, let's be honest. What are we talking about? You are threatening that I will deal with you, and you are still saying, let me talk to you. How does it...
I mean, it looks like a carrot and stick.
Good.
We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The choice is yours. But what is your reading of the situation, especially now that in Niger we understand that there is a rebellion against the military junta now, and it has to do with the Tuareg rebels, and we know of their notoriety as far as the activity is concerned. And this just opens up old wounds, because in the Sahel, Niger is seen as the big Western ally that allows for all these military bases to be put in place to fight insurgents, to fight terrorists and things like that. What are the chances that this could snowball into something even bigger than just a fight for democracy?
Well, it is already bigger than a fight for democracy, because you can see the Tuareg rebellion that is, of course, simmering, is only but a sign of much deeper chasms in the country. The ethnic fault lines are there. They have been brushed over the years through some other means, but surely you could see them coming back, because now there is an ethnic connotation to the conflict. That's why, for the first time, the Tuaregs are asking questions. Okay, their own was there, and he was not allowed to rule. This has been the tradition almost all over Africa. Ethnicity and other ideologies or divisions are at the bottom of almost all that we see. And so, yes, Niger could snowball into something much complex, because when you have to deal with the ethnic enclaves now, each asking for its own, we will have problem, no doubt about it. But the military solution might not also be the solution. Diplomacy still remains what can possibly bring solutions. Now, I hinted on the third party involvement in this crisis, and you are right to have echoed the effort of the Emir Sanusi and his colleague in Damagaram, who so far have been the only envoy or delegation outside of Niger to have succeeded in speaking directly to the new military ruler. You can see how important such interventions are. They have tendencies to listen to third party, because, like I said, fighting me on one hand and telling me we are still friends on the other might not work. It might not work. Now, these people went in more or less like a totally detached elders and are able to have the ears of the new leader. And, well, we were not privy to what must have been discussed. But, of course, you can see even the release of Bazoum himself might have been connected to some of this, because all along the question of release him and do this and do that has failed. Now, the danger of releasing and leaving him in the country is also another matter that perhaps today the heads of state must look at, because you could be creating another cell of conflict as long as he remains. Let us go back to African tradition. When an emir, king, or monarch is removed from authority, he is usually not allowed to stay on the same soil.
With the next one?
Yes, on good reason. And so you could find that whenever a leader is removed, he is effectively taken out of the jurisdiction somewhere else. So I suppose ECOWAS has very fundamental issues to look at today. The president might not, that's the former president, might not be restored.
That is a possibility.
Yes, it's a reality that we might not get away from it easily, because restoring him means removing someone else. And removing someone else means so many things.
It's like we're dealing with Sophie's choice here. So many undesirable outcomes, and they're the only ones that we have to deal with, unfortunately. In a conversation on the state of affairs regarding Niger Republic and the impasse that ECOWAS is having to deal with. Remember, today, much later, the heads of states and government in ECOWAS will be meeting here in Abuja for an extraordinary summit to further look at their options available for them as they try to continue to treat the situation, the political crisis in Niger. But of course, we're trying to unpack all of these developments vis-a-vis what has happened and what is likely going to be the case going forward. Mr. Haruna Ali Warkani, retired diplomat with ECOWAS Commission and Deputy Country Chair of United Nations Economic and Social Council, has been giving us his thoughts, helping us navigate some of these situations, as well as talking points this morning, as we try to understand a lot more about what's happening and what the current situation presents for the rest of the region. So just before the break, we're talking about how difficult of a situation we're in as a region and what ECOWAS has to deal with. If you're to give your projection on what is likely going to be the way out, where ECOWAS can save face, and then there's also perhaps an exit strategy for the military leadership in Niger. What does a win-win, if at all we can get a win-win situation from this impasse, what would it look like in your view?
Well, a win-win situation would be a demand for return to democracy within a period of time, which is the traditional practice, and a take from the military authorities in Niger to say, okay, we'll take some months, some years to restore democracy back to Niger. This, I suppose, will be high up on the agenda with ECOWAS, because the reality now is there is a government. Removing that government is as difficult as restoring the old one. That is the choice. So, if you go by way of how soon can the military regime there go, you will also find that ECOWAS might be confronted with the stark reality of failed promises, like it has happened in other countries that were in similar situations. Promises were made for a transition period. The transition is shifted, or transition goals are shifted, as by timelines, and it keeps ECOWAS completely engaged. Talks continue, unending, because you see, the military leadership, once installed, is very, very difficult to remove. Even if we were to take the option of the military intervention will only complicate this matter beyond belief and spiral out of control, because it has not been recorded anywhere that you could easily come from outside and effect an internal change desirable to all.
You're saying Liberia and Sierra Leone were not a good example?
They were not. So they came at a very huge cost to the sub-region in lives, money, equipment, social dislocation, livelihood disruptions, etc., etc. So it is even very difficult to kind of replicate those kind of events. Sierra Leone and Liberia cannot be replicated easily today. The complications of the relationships that existed in the 90s and today are no longer the same. The political space has vastly changed. International relations has changed such that people tell you what they don't mean. And so, like you rightly observed, if Russia is already suspected to be involved here in Africa now, you will begin to see that we are having more players complicating the dynamics of what is going on. Yes, during Sierra Leone and Liberia, we had difficulties of containing some of the Western countries because they had divergent interests to the interests of West Africa in those days. And therefore, you could see that they were supplying arms, ammunition, social support, etc., to the rebels, in quotes. And now that you have restored democracy in those countries through military intervention, it did not stop anything. Because don't forget, I think a week or so ago, there was this rumor of also another coup in Sierra Leone, attempted. Right. Which means the prescriptions of the 90s did not solve the problem. Military coups might still be occurring, except until we get to the bottom line and solve the problem of bad governance.
Yeah. All right. One of the things I would like to get your perspective on, it's the role Nigeria needs to play in some of the ideas that you have put forward, and how complicated that role will be, considering that we are the Ecowas chair. And largely so, again, because it does appear that every other country is looking forward to what position Nigeria takes on this issue. We, at the forefront of this sanction is a direct consequence on our relationship with Niger, regardless of what goes on there. We've closed our borders, we've stopped food supplies,
cut
and all
power
of that,
supply.
and this will complicate humanitarian situations in those places. How does this president, in the face of all the pressure we have seen at home, basically I think it's Nigeria that has stopped ECOWAS from proceeding, from sending tanks across. But how does this president juggle the dual responsibility of, first of all, preserving a relationship with Niger that is critical in our own fight against Boko Haram and other insurgency, where Niger has been a very good friend and supporter of the fight, and meeting these ideals that you have talked about? How do we navigate this twin responsibility?
Well, one would start by saying maybe we pity our president, because upon inauguration, you are bestowed with the office of the chairman of the authority of ECOWAS at the same time. And suddenly, from nowhere, this crisis broke out. Now, Nigeria and Niger have a very special relationship. And this special relationship imposes on us some demands that might not be obvious to so many players in the field. Now, there are times when Niger would have been said to be like an extra state in Nigeria. And so far, in our diplomatic relations with countries, there is no country on earth that Nigeria has enjoyed that closeness in relationship like with Niger. At international fora, Niger hardly even votes for anything without consulting us to say, oh, big brother or big friend or big neighbor, good neighbor, how are we voting? That has been a practice that we have noticed. So in this case, Mr. President has to take extra steps of care to ensure that this special relationship is not unnecessarily inflicted with pains. And we observe with some consternation the rather hasty disconnection of electricity to Niger.
Do you believe that those actions that have been taken by, say for instance, the president here, I mean, obviously he's like you did say, he's not sitting in a very comfortable position right now, because his actions are not just the actions of the Nigerian president, but also the chairman of Ecowas. And I believe it could be conflicting, because you're trying to be a good neighbor, but at the same time you have a responsibility to the body itself. So if the body, and I think the president's spokesperson came out 2 days ago to say, listen, these are the actions of Ecowas. And he might be the president of Nigeria, but he's also the chairman of Ecowas, and he has to execute the agenda of Ecowas. This is not his agenda as a president. And we obviously see how unpopular the idea of a military intervention is across board here in Nigeria. I mean, we just broke the news about, religious leaders saying that this is not an option on the table and it should not be considered. Yeah. We all know that we have a responsibility to Niger as much as it has to us to maintain that good relationship. But in terms of, the win-win that you did talk about, it sounded like if that was the way to go, it will not necessarily be something that ECOWAS would really look back and say, we negotiated something of a good deal. That sounds like something the military junta will say, oh, okay, they're off our backs and we get to determine when we have the next election, and then we can have somebody else in charge other than Mohamed Bazoum. Does anything that is currently happening right now suggest that this is the trajectory of how things are going to end up?
Well, most likely, because like we said, it's a matter of options. And the authority of heads of state of ECOWAS are surely running out of these options. If you are going for negotiation, there must be some other maybe untried possibilities that you are opening up. The military, you've told them, okay, you have to vacate, you have to restore Bazoum. That's all. There was nothing else to negotiate, right?
There was no exit strategy for them or anything. At all.
But we have seen that this already has failed. The military remain in place. Bazoum has resigned and gone. And so, will the authority of ECOWAS heads of state be looking at bringing back such leadership into office? And like I said,
do you think his resignation changes the dynamics of the conversation now?
It does.
Is it a legal one? I mean, I suppose if you resign under duress, it could not necessarily count.
Well, duress or no duress, in international parlance, it has been done. Right. He is out of the palace. Like I said, getting back into that palace will amount to getting someone also out of the palace. And the person who holds the power today has an upper hand. Except in Sao Tome and Principe, where SY President Obasanjo was able to carry a president that was ousted in a coup and went back on his own and planted back the president, saying, hey, this coup does not stand. Who are the coup plotters even, and the rest of them, threatened everybody and planted the man and came back, right? That's the only history so far that we can say successfully someone has been restored. Even in the cases of Sierra Leone and Liberia, the fact is, it was not those who were removed that were brought back. It was democracy that was restored. So in this case, what is before the authority of heads of state and government today?
They shouldn't insist on Bazoum.
No. Bazoum is a no-go area because it will amount to something, escalation. And I don't think that is what the heads of state will want to do. Okay. Not escalation.
Okay. That sounds like a way out. Whether or not that's what the extraordinary committee or summit will do remains to be seen. But Mr. Warkani, thank you so much for your insight and for your expertise in the analysis. We really do appreciate you for stopping by this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, viewers. Thank you.
And I hope you're able to break into your schedule next time.
Right, exactly. This is a developing situation, so you never know.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, I hope that we all have benefited from these conversations this morning. We promised you the 2 best hours of your day today. I'm sure we have delivered on those mandates. What is left is to wish you the best of the day. I'm Sunday Michael Ogu. Let's do this again tomorrow.
And my name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you very much, as always, for your time and company. Enjoy the rest of your day. Good morning.